Hey everyone, it is Wednesday, Ash Wednesday, it's Happy Ash Wednesday. I'll probably post this on Friday, so this is going to be my dissertation on why I believe the globalists want to depopulate, dehumanize, and demoralize us. This is based off of the visions that I have had with regards to where our future is headed, the history of our past, and what's currently going on. And on top of that, this is also, I did like a mini dive into the history of the United States from a slave's perspective. And I'm gonna kind of stick to that for the most part, because if I go all over the place, like world history, then it gets overwhelming for me, especially because that's not something that I'm familiar with. Now, if you guys have watched my other videos, I talked about how I was being called to read the Bible. I don't think I mentioned this at that point. I'm not sure, but it's been a long time that message has been coming through. It's only been recently that it's, well, recently for me, because it's been like however long, where it's coming in stronger and stronger. It's very persistent that I need to read the Bible. And I've been putting it off and making excuses. Well, since the very beginning, it's almost like angelic trickery in a way, like in a positive way is kind of what I'm saying, where I'll do readings and then it guides me to something that's relevant to the Bible, or I'll end up coming up against like a wall, like it's a wall where I understand what's happening, but because I don't have the context, then it's very difficult. And had I read the Bible, and it's not just the Bible, because I'm aware that what's going to happen after the Bible is I'm going to study other religions, and so that's where it essentially starts though. And so that's where I end up at a standstill. So I'm being put into positions where I'm even more guided to do that. Like I have more reason to do it. On top of that, I would start getting dreams, and this is, I'll tell you one vision I've had several visions. I don't know when I'll tell you guys this, like when it's relevant, but like one of my visions I had, it was a series of numbers, and it was this feeling of unrest. It was like a spiritual unrest in me, like I have to figure out what these numbers mean. And I would keep searching and searching and searching, and I couldn't figure it out. So the reason I knew I wasn't figuring it out is because I could just feel like that's not it. Keep going, keep going, keep going. And this was a long time ago, so it was still unfamiliar to me to kind of follow these intuitive nudges. And so I was like, I don't know, I was just kind of trying to put it off, but it would keep bothering me. And so I started just kind of praying, or like asking myself, like, if there's something more, like I need more context. I need more than just these numbers. And I don't know how to explain it, because it wasn't told to me. Like it wasn't, I'm getting up, that's my voice is changing. It wasn't told to me specifically like a website or anything. It was just like, I don't know how to explain it. It wasn't even like a download. It was just some weird thing where it was happening in some part of my brain, where I knew I had this like, it's like a deep subconscious awareness that there's a website that had this series of numbers that was specific to a year. And so I wrote it down. I kept circling it. And I knew it was a year, and I knew it was like something unique. And so long story short, I got to this website and I felt rest. I felt at peace. Like, this is it. I figured it out. And then it sparked back up again, and I started doing more research into it, because this website had a mine. It was a specific mine, and they were mining a specific jewel. And then that was the time that this mine, it was just this 1 year, and then they closed down. And then it had to do, long story even shorter, is it had to do with someone within the Bible. And from there I started researching this particular person, and it was like all these things that were happening in my life started to make sense. It was like this particular person, I feel like I was being guided to, whether they were directly communicating or not. It was like I needed to know this information. And so that's kind of what I see now, where I'll start getting dreams and I'll see series of numbers and letters, and it comes in different textures. And then from there, it's like I already know it's in the Bible, and I'll open it to or I'll look it up online of like what I think it says, like Ephesians, whatever, and it'll literally say exactly what I'm thinking about. And I'm like, this is so crazy. It's so wild. It's like, if I never believed anything then or ever, I believe more than anything now. So I have a Bible here that I want to discuss, and I actually bookmarked something because I thought it was really interesting. And in the front, this is a very old Bible. This is from the 1800s. And the people who had it wrote down like historical records of the area all the way dating back to the early 1700s. And it's kind of funny to me because this is from an area that's like really, basically, if those people back then, if they could teleport to, or if I could teleport back there and hold their Bible, they would probably kill me immediately. They would be so mad because I am not the kind of person that they want holding this Bible. So anyway, why was I talking about all this to begin with? Oh, because I want to jump all the way to the beginning of time. Okay, and all this stuff I've briefly mentioned in my upcoming pre-recorded Wednesday videos. So stuff that I talk about, I'm gonna kind of touch on it. I need to write this down so that I'm gonna put 300, because that 300 years is the projected time that I was getting for this whole Mars invasion, from Earth to Mars, and then a return to Earth. They want 300. It was originally, I feel, 300 to 500 years. They knocked it down to 300, and I think they're trying to make it even faster than that. So here they want to get us to Mars within the next several years, like within our lifetime, right? Which we already know this, but I'll get into that anyway. They want to colonize, but I feel like they're going to start calling the people of Earth, like the people who remain, colonizers, which is interesting. Or maybe nationalists, maybe. I don't know, but they're going to call these people something different that'll kind of relate back to like early American civilization. And I want to say too, just to state this, that I think that a like stipend for people and equal pay for not equal pay, but like, you know, a certain amount, like basically what Elon Musk says would be just the best thing for people. Absolutely not. That's never going to work for humanity. Never, 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 never. In a perfect world, I absolutely wish and desire that. But until we all heal before we elevate everything, I don't believe that's something that should ever be called into place. It's just a manipulation in order to enslave us, because it sounds good. It sounds good, and it's something that we're all, like, they're going to try and get us all to push towards. But all it's doing is controlling people, because who do you think is going to be responsible for the finances? Who do you think is going to be responsible for the rationing? Of course, these greedy people are never, ever in their entire lives going to give up their riches, which you will see when I talk about early America. And you can date that back into history, because it's just so wild. So anyway, yeah, so where do I want to start? So I'm going to go back to the very beginning of time, where I talked about how there were different legions of angels, elevated beings that were designated to different parts of the universe, like the whole entire universe, not just this earth and here, everywhere, and space-time, everywhere, you get it. And Satan, I do feel, and you'll see this in one of my videos, I think I mentioned this recently though, I feel like Earth, specifically Earth, and I don't know, because I think Mars is going to be another reason where they mess up completely. So I'm wondering if once you leave Earth, then you're kind of like in no man's land, so you kind of especially screw up. I'm not sure. These globalists know more than I do, obviously. They would have this esoteric knowledge, but I know that it's always skewed because they're misinterpreting everything. But basically, like, here's the thing, before I really get into all that, is it's like, well, what's it matter? Like, if you know anyone who's super crooked in your life, or if you know, like, in some sort of powerful position, some of these people have this mentality where they don't think ahead generations, right? They will run things into the dirt. They don't care what the repercussions are as long as they sit pretty for this lifetime. They don't care what happens after it, right? Now, what about these globalists? Why would they have this continuation of things in order to preserve their race, right? It's a master race is how they see themselves. And the reason they see themselves is because they are purebloods. They interbreed with each other because it's from the beginning of time, because they're original demons. And if you watched, I believe I said it, but essentially there was interbreeding through the beginning of time when we became incarnated into human beings and into other ways that we can breed among each other. So there's alien DNA within us, okay? And so they are able to use the solar system to track people and to track souls in order to see where they incarnate into their next life. And they have some sort of programming that they use in order to reawaken those parts. And it's very similar but different to why they do these traumatic things to people on varying levels, whether they do it to the public with all of the things that they put out and convince people are fun things to do or decent things to do that are actually traumatizing everyone, or they're intentionally doing it in covert ways, whether it's through different programs that they're doing and experiments on the public or on private people, or if they're breeding people in places that we are not, as a general public, are not aware of, that higher ups and people who are connected to higher ups have awareness of, but they don't speak of. All of those ways that they're trying to awaken those parts of us, the demonic parts of us, the psychopathic parts of us. It's alien DNA within us because we've interbred so many times, but they've kept it relatively pure. And so when people talk about seeing reptilians and all these other things, it's because the density between these different universes is thinner and the frequency of the world is lowered enough that they can be seen that way. Not to mention people who are just perceptive enough or intuitive enough that they can see beyond what this reality is. So it depends on the person, it depends on the situation as to why they can see these reptilians, why they are seen that way to begin with. But there's something about them harvesting our souls, and that's essentially their lifeblood of why there's massive enslavement. That's part of That's part of it. It's not just the greed, it's that they need it. It's their necessity, right? They need the trauma in order to have a mass lowering of the frequency so they can exist. They cease to exist if we are healed as a whole. And so enslaving people and oppressing people and causing trauma on people will keep them alive. So that's the history from the very beginning of these people. They're descendants of Satan. They're descendants of Satan. And I believe from my visions that the earth is essentially Satan's playground. This is where Lucifer was allowed to exist. And it's not in a bad way, okay? This isn't like supposed to be a scary, horrific thing. It's the balance between light and dark. It's the balance between free will, right? Or it's the opportunity of free will and divine law. Divine law and free will, right? Free will can essentially be the will of evil. You know what I mean? So that's where why this place is so special, and where this is, the significance of people's choices make a difference. That's the secret of the world, I feel. And so, yeah, just kind of trickling all the way down to where I want to talk about the United States. So I have to draw this to illustrate it because it helps me with my mind. So as we probably, most of us know, like I'm just laughing because I'm like, well, I just kind of researched a little bit more, so this kind of helps me out. But basically, the United States was no man's land, right? Like it was unconquered, but it was constantly wanting to be conquered. That's this huge area, right? The British, the Spaniards, all these people are trying to get to America. And so slavery existed since the beginning of time, right? Since free will existed, and Satan chose to be this way, which is, it's part of the divine plan, is where we feel, which is in here, I'll talk about it, but it's part of it, which I talked about in the other videos too. So that explains why I feel this whole thing is so important. So crazy to think about, but anyway, so all this slavery existed, and it still exists present day, right? But the difference with the United States is it's slavery against a separate race, right? Like it's a visual difference between people. When you have slavery in other places, back then, it wasn't necessarily the case, right? And at least not to the same degree. I know it existed in that way in other countries, but not to the degree that it existed within the United States, right? I'm just thinking to myself, that was a question to myself. Yes, that is correct. So, why? Okay, this is what I want to explain. So, and I was thinking about how Florida, because I said it in the last video, I used California, but I was thinking about Florida when I said it, because Florida has this area where they tried to flee. The slaves at one point, they tried to flee to this area in Florida where the Spaniards were like, hey, if you join our military, then we'll like free you, essentially. And so that was like, it made me think about that. So anyway, so here's the thing is, for me personally, what I believe, and this is what I got from visions, I've never been like excited, I guess, I don't know the word, like patriotic, I guess, for our founding fathers, because I think that they're just gross. I think they're gross people, and they're opportunists, and they're just disgusting, and they play themselves because they didn't think ahead of how strong the will of the people are, right? Not just slaves, but the patriots. Like, they really misjudged that it's the Spirit of God never goes away. People will constantly persevere through any tragedy. So it's just as ridiculous. And you can take that back to Egypt, because I feel like this is a repetition of Egypt, where it's just the same thing. People awaken, and this is what's going to happen here in Mars if we don't prevent it. It's going to be this massive exodus of people there eventually. It would take probably a long time again, but this whole thing needs to completely stop. It needs to stop. But anyway, so to me, what I saw in visions is how this hierarchy of people from the beginning of time, I'm pretending that's them, from the beginning of time, these purebred demons, essentially, like they're purebred demons, they were always from the beginning in control of the system, right? And so they were able to eventually overcome different countries. The United States was still kind of free, and some other countries too, European countries and everything like that. But they were they're little by little, right? And they've conquered more at this point because they have more money. So we'll talk about Britain. Most of them are in Britain, right? And basically they sent over people like Washington and some of the other founding fathers. I think there were some decent people in there mixed around, like the Quakers and everything. Like, for the most part, I mean, that's generalizing all the Quakers, but for the most part, they're decent people. And so again, they can't get the all control, but they try, and it seems like they win out a lot of the time, because look at where we are today. But anyway, so these founding fathers, it's just a control system. America was just built in order for them to gain more money and more control, obviously, right? It was never about freedom, and signing the Declaration of Independence was a falsity. It was a lie. It was a lie to make it appear as if we were independent, so that would have a surge of a workforce, and like keeping people together instead of fighting amongst each other. Because you think about, like, in Britain and all these other places, these people look familiar, like they look similar, but they still fight amongst each other because they have differing belief systems. And so here it's the same thing. Everyone's fighting different belief systems. They are kind of losing control, and they need to conquer the whole place. So then that is why I believe that they falsified a free country, and it backfired on them, because look at where they ended up having to free the slaves however many 100 years later, which they would have never wanted to do, which is kind of where I'm getting to with this. So they were bringing over all these slaves, right, from all these other countries, which I think is like so crazy to me. Like, it's so crazy to think, like, if you put yourself in those people's positions, like these white people, well, these British people, and they're like bringing in people from all different African countries and Asian countries, wherever they're gathering them, and they all look different, right? And they all speak different, and they have different cultures. They don't speak the same language as each other, and you just throw them all together. Like, oh, they all look the same. They're all slaves. Like, they are different from each other themselves. Like, they're obviously not the same. So it's like, it's so crazy. It's like very interesting to think about from their perspective. But this is a manipulation on the colonists, right? It's a manipulation on them, because they're being brought up and bred to believe that black people, okay, so now instead, before, with the majority of people and slaves, it's like basically what I'm getting is they're trying to give a visual of a difference of people. That would naturally happen anyway. When you see people that look different than you pay attention to it, because it's something that, not in a racist way, but just in a way to identify people, right? And then that can turn into not understanding people if you want. Even with aliens, that's probably the same thing. Like actual aliens, but it's because you look different. You don't speak the same language. Anyway, so these colonists are being brought up to believe that these black people are barbaric, right? They're barbaric because, number one, they don't speak the same language. Number two, the atrocities that they are witnessing, these white people are witnessing, happening from slave owners, from people in positions of power, first of all. Second of all, what they inflict on themselves, right? These slaves, like, they would kill themselves, they would kill their children, they would kill their family, they would stab their stomachs, you know, if they were pregnant, they would stab their bellies, because they're trying to essentially save them from torture, save them from this enslavement. And so how does that look when they're seeing these people who are doing things that they've probably never experienced or they've never seen, and they're completely different from them? Like, think about it from those white people's perspectives too. And on top of that, they didn't have liberties either. The women didn't have any rights. They had no religious freedom. You know, they said they had religious freedom, but they really didn't. They had to abide by Christian law. And the Christian law, they manipulated to their own favor, right? These secret societies manipulated it to their own favor. And so there was already modern enslavement of the white people as well, of being silenced. This is my thing, is think about how powerful these slave owners were, how much money they had. They had ridiculous amounts of money. Imagine if they just paid people. They didn't take slaves, they didn't take them from anywhere. They took the white people that they brought over and paid them. Paid them a fair wage. How much money these rich people would still have. And they're not hurting anybody. They're not kidnapping anybody. They're literally helping the people that they're bringing over. But no, they're screwing everyone over. They're enslaving everyone in two different ways. You know, like, it wasn't easy for early colonists either. They had diseases. They had no food, no water. They had nothing. Everyone was poor except for the people in power. And it remained that way. Even the people during World War II, I know this for a fact, that a lot of the slave owners, they were still deeply connected to Europe. And they knew ahead of time that it was going to happen. So they were trying to save their family. They were like sending people over, like, to make sure that their family didn't go there, this and that, because they were afraid that, you know, they would get persecuted. So that war could have been stopped. People already knew that was going to, before it happened. Did they help? No. Like, they did not help at all. And then you think about now, that, like, for me, I'm like, that's what I'm saying, is like, all these people are going into hiding. Like, they're literally, like, I'm not making that up. They're literally leaving. Like, billionaires, they have private planes, private helicopters, and private places to go. They're not here anymore. They already left. Why? What do they know? What are they planning? Right? It's very, very interesting. Anyway, yeah, so I just think about, like, long standing, this is the 300 is because if we take early America, right? So like, let's just round it down to 1700, right? Because that's pretty much it. And then we go all the way to 20. We'll do it's the early 2007. That's 300 years right there. It took it was 1776 for the independence, right? And then I don't know, where's my hey Siri? She's not in here. And then when was the Emancipation Proclamation? Probably somewhere in the 1800s or something. And then when was civil? Probably around 1950s or something. 100 years each time. Each time it took 100 years for these radical changes. And each time these radical changes happened, it was a political move. Every single time it was a political move. It was never about the people, right? And even when you think about the cotton gin, the creation of the cotton gin, it's to make people more money. What people? The slave owners, the British, more money. They were still British. They were independent, but that's a freaking lie. I'm sorry, but that's a lie. There are a few good people there. That I will say, that is true, because again, they have to let a couple people succeed, right? They can't just close it off completely, because they have no way to control people to that capacity. It's way overpopulated, which is where the depopulation comes in, because they realize we're out of control. And that's what happened with the slaves. The slaves, they repopulated because they were breeding them, right? They were raping them. They were buying people like cattle, like, trying to make good stock breeds and like treating them like freaking animals. And then any other white people who would try and speak out against it, including the Quakers, they would beat, they would starve, they would injure. So everyone was stuck. It's not just crimes against them, it's crimes against everybody. But they're trying to, from present day, I think it's a continuation of manipulation on the public to pin people against each other, because they were still struggling in the 1950s. You can look at it that way too. There were still so many Americans struggling, and it was like they were finally getting a taste of what it was like to have like a relatively decent life, right? Because they spent all their generations of parents realizing the struggles that were overcome. And so then these black people are struggling and struggling and struggling for the same freedoms. It's like, yeah, maybe we would die of distemper, maybe we would die of, being a refugee, but at least we would be dying free. At least we would have that choice to die. We're not dying at the hands of a freaking slave owner, right? And so they're trying to free themselves, they're trying to free themselves, and now they're competition. They're competition for the white man, and all the immigrants that they're allowing into the country over and over again are also competition for the white man to have a chance at life. Everyone's fighting for a chance at life. The little people are fighting, while the big people are just getting more money. All of the general public's fighting because these are the people who are breadcrumbing us. You see? And so it's just repetition of that. It's repetition. The problem is we're becoming far too intelligent, and they're throwing so many different things to distract us, to slow us down. And I think, well, I'll derail too much if I talk about all that, but it's an attempt to regain power. It's an attempt to regain power because time and time again, there were people, white people and black people, who were trying to release the slaves. The only reason the Emancipation Proclamation happened is because it was they wanted to use black people. That's it. They would have never released slavery if it wasn't for that, because they were using them for money. Which, again, if you go back to my first point, if you were a decent human being, you would never have to do that to begin with. You didn't have to do that. And I get, like, I can see it from another perspective of if you want to preserve the country, if you want to conquer this country, like, you're going to have to build a strong army. You're going to have to become strong yourself, right? Like, there has to be some way. And so I guess, like, the quickest and the easiest and most efficient to people is to have slavery, I guess, because you can kind of, like, force them to do things, right? Like, you can't really force. It's like if you give someone a choice, if you give someone that free will, right? If you don't enslave them, it's kind of like going back to God. It's like God's giving you that free will. It's like, do what you will. And it's taking a very long time to return back to God. He could just force everyone to come back. He could corral everyone to come back. But what does that gain you? It does nothing, right? It's ignorance on God if you were to do that. You have to allow people to figure it out, and it takes a while, and it takes a lot of troubles, right? But it does work out. You just have to believe in that. But so it's kind of like, I don't know. It's kind of a weird situation to think about, because you think, like, Spaniards were probably enslaving the heck out of people at one point. I don't know if they continued to, because I think that they started looking at people, well, they say they looked at people as equals, but I don't think they really do or really did. It's just a power play. It's just using people, right? And it's not just because they were black. I think it's just because that's the way that things were put into place, right? They would do the same thing with the white people. They would have gladly taken them on and used them for whatever thing. That's the only reason, even with the freedom and people having equal rights and equal liberties, it was for a financial gain. It was never for the people. Nothing was ever for the people. But what did they do? What did the people do? What did the certain leaders within the black community do? What did certain leaders within the white communities do? They found loopholes in order to use that not use it against them, but use it for the good of everyone. They ended up using the power of their minds to be able to outsmart the system. So on a scale of right now, what does that mean? To me, that's a representation of how that was a period of 300 years. If you take up American history, that was a period of 300 years to see this radical change in things. And I'm not going to say that racism is completely abolished, because it's absolutely not. I witness racism every day of my life towards myself from all races, from black people, from white people. Mexicans, not so much. Mexicans aren't really racist towards me ever, really. They were actually really, I never really see that. But I get it all the time. Both my neighbors on either side are super racist. So that it still exists, and there's discrimination within our legal systems and everything. That's absolutely true. But there are so many more liberties that were granted today and opportunities that were granted today. And there are also a lot of bills in place specifically for minorities, for women, because during this whole thing, that's why I'm focusing on slaves, but the same thing with women and the women's rights movements and the religious freedoms, right? It was all of these that were, everyone's fighting on both ends. They're just trying to have freedom. They're trying to have a chance at life, because nobody chose, like, they didn't choose to be here. The only people who actually really chose were the freaking leaders. These other people came over for a chance at a good life, but, you know, like, present day, nobody chose to be here, right? Like, well, except for the current immigrants, but I mean, like, you get what I'm saying though, right? You essentially, like, we are not these people anymore. At one point we were probably all these people, which is, to derail a little bit, it's just, like, so funny to me when I think about racist people, because it makes me think, like, who were you in a past life? Like, how crazy would that blow your mind if you were aware that you were a different race, like, that you're against? It's just weird to me, because that definitely does occur, and maybe that's a reason why you're racist, like why you grew up that way. What that has to do with whatever happened in the past. I have another radical theory, by the way, that I really feel very strongly about with the slaves, modern slaves, not modern slaves, but the early African slaves and Egyptian slaves. I think a lot, because souls have to inhabit those bodies, right? They churned through so many different souls during the slavery. So many. Think over these couple hundred years. Not to mention, they go from thousands to millions within a year. 100 years. You know, they multiplied very quickly. And you think, on top of having those many that exist, all the ones who killed themselves, all the ones who died, natural causes, all the ones who were murdered, all of those. That's so wild how many souls were churned through all of that. And then the same thing with Egypt. And I think it's a way for our spiritual DNA to pick up on that, like to add that to our spiritual understanding of one another and relation to one another. And I don't think that was like a sacrifice thing on people, and I don't think that even from like the demonic side of like lowering people's frequencies, I think that on the crooked and crazier side of things, it was more of like what they would have been doing is like actual sacrifices and like fighting slaves and stuff. Like that was for entertainment, but they would have other things on the side that are probably not in public text. Like that's probably not released because it's more private stuff, that they would have been doing some really, really crazy stuff to the slaves, and they would have done really, really crazy stuff to the colonizers, because then we have like the witch hunts, we have like even the Quakers that they were injuring, and all these people, right? They were jailing them and persecuting them for speaking out against what the ruling class desired, right? And so, which is essentially why they were trying to detach from Britain, but it was a freaking lie. But anyway, so what was I saying about that? Oh, it's like a DNA pickup, to make like a spiritual DNA pickup where you have that experience. So you had it in Egypt with all those slaves getting murdered, and like there's a remembrance of that for a lot of people. And yeah, I think a lot of us were there. I don't know how many souls exist but souls is like the energy. It cannot be created nor destroyed. Like souls are, because we've been here since the beginning of time, since creation. I'm just thinking, because I'm like, maybe a lot of them were in Egypt, and then the ones who didn't get it got it through there. Because then that's going to wake people up to prevent this. Like, it's going to be like something ingrained in a lot of people of this Mars situation. Isn't that here? Of this Mars situation where it's like, like not only ethically, because we're obviously more advanced and we have more ability and power than we have before, even though those of the rich have more power as well. They're not going to wipe everyone out, because they're going to try and wipe a lot of people out, but their power means nothing if they don't have anyone to enslave. Their money means nothing if they don't have people without, right? Like, they needed slaves to build America. Like, America is built on slave labor, which is horrific, but as far as like from an African American's perspective, which in theory, everyone's perspective, because I think that's a limited awareness, because I feel like, again, with reincarnation, you can't really say, oh, like, I'm not robbing the African Americans of their real life lineage, right? That's significant in its own right, but at the same time, it's something that you can honor in a lot of ways, because how much ingenuity and just, it's just incredible to think, like, the power that people and the intelligence that people have to create something. And this is the same thing with the pyramids, right? It's like tragic. It's really tragic. And then you think of like the same thing with like the white people. They were enslaved in their own ways. Everyone's just trying to survive, but they built too, right? They with like the new system of how they were able to work for companies, right? They're able to earn a wage, a living wage. The white people eventually were able to earn a living wage, and so they were still struggling. They had nothing. They had pennies. They would have to, you know, also live in shacks and have one article of clothing. Like, it was the same thing, but they persevered. All these people, all these souls, no matter the difficulties that were placed on them, they persevered. They never gave up. We're still here, right? And there are so many people who are successful. They're nowhere near these people who have trillions upon trillions of uncharted, off-record money, but that's the whole threat, right? That's the entire threat that they have, because they can't let that continue to happen. So their plan essentially is to do that 300 year of colonizing and capturing people, and it's a different way, right? Because now we all seem similar but different. It's the same but different. It's constantly same but different. We look same but different. We have the same but different struggles, all of that. And so what are they doing now? They're using the history to manipulate people into pinning themselves against each other, right? And it's always that. It's a political thing. It's a racial thing. It's a ethical thing. All of this to pin people against each other. It's like taking an ant hill and throwing it against another ant hill and having the ants fight to the death until one wins. And then the next ant hill and throw it in until something wins. And then they just continuously do that. But guess who wins? It's the farmer that's putting the ants on the ant hill, right? He's the one who wins, because they're just self-eliminating. So that's what they're banking on right now, keeping people not unified and just following. Because even when you think about back to America, and you think about slaves, and you think about the people in the 50s who were burning other things down, it evolved. That perception evolved. That perception from the beginning of saying these black people, well, they wouldn't even call them people, right? These slaves are animals. They don't. This is where it started. Is they manipulated people off of Christianity. They said because they don't believe in Christianity, they aren't human. So therefore, they don't have human rights, and that is their loophole. They manipulated people based off the Bible, and and they're trying to destroy people with God's word. But if you read it, if you understand it, I'm like saying it like I read it. But that's essentially what I'm saying, is like, you can manipulate the word for your own advantage, but it can never actually be permanent. This is God's word. Time and time again, it stands the test of time. And even though it played a part. It never played a part in enslaving people. People enslaved people. That was their decision. But it was God's word that released the people. There were Quakers that were eventually able to go around. They're able to get in to America and stay and not get persecuted, and were part of the American system, and they truly believed in equality of women and the equality of slaves. At first, some of them didn't, but eventually they came around and they recognized, you know, that that's wrong, and they would go around to different slave owners and preach the word of God with the example of Egypt, that they need to let go of the slaves. They need to free them. So that's the other corruption that they have on biblical texts, is that they're trying to weaponize it and guide people away from it as if this is a toxic thing, because they created the toxicities from this. If you find for yourself, if you find this information for yourself, within yourself, because it's all within us, which is the original Quaker belief, is God is within all of us, then you'll be able to perceive and see the truth in this. And I didn't even get into Adam and Eve. I had a vision about that as well. But that's essentially why I think that that's my belief of why they're trying to kill us all, because it's a way of control. And this is, again, think about, I'm only talking about that. I'm not talking about all the experiments that were placed on us. I'm not talking about the atrocities that were placed on people other than just black people, right? Like, they time and time again just used people as crop. They just used people as slaves. It's the perception that these were the only slaves. But that's not true. We were all enslaved. We were all enslaved. We were all pawns. Oh, that's what I say about the 50s, is that perception changed from the slaves being, you know, religiously like different or whatever, so they're not people. And I guarantee that there were a lot of really wonderful people during that time that weren't able to speak out, or were scared to speak out, or couldn't. They couldn't. Or they would be killed, just like the slaves couldn't, because they would be killed. But, and in the 50s, there were wonderful people as well. But basically, they looked as if, oh, well, you're just not equal. You're nothing. Like, they weren't, that's 200 years later. 200 years later, and that perception of black people stayed, but evolved. You get what I'm saying? I'm not saying it in a way that I feel I should, but anyway, it's just very fascinating. And so I feel like this, with them throwing everything out present day on us and trying to confuse everything is because they're freaking out. They're freaking out because it's dismantling again, just as it did in all these different time periods where they tried to get it to work for them because they had greedy motives. They had stupid, greedy, selfish motives, and they played themselves every single time. And it's happening again. To what capacity? I feel is that's why they're trying to shut down freedom of speech. That's why they're trying to shut down people's basic liberties, and they're trying to invoke fear, and they're trying to invoke confusion so that people will just sit down, shut up, and listen to them because they know better, that kind of thing. That's what I see here. And that's the only way that they're going to be able to do it, right? And just as they did with the slaves, or they would behead them, or they would hang them, and they would show them off to display, to make other sick people emboldened for that, and to, you know, strengthen that perception, that separation, that perception of separation, to invoke negative emotions, demonic emotions. This is all demonic. Whether they're aware of it or not, this is all demonic because it's rooted from the demons themselves. These principles are demonic principles that are passed down so that it's played out with lower level people all the way down to us, regular people. So basically, that's equal to what's kind of happening now, is like they're making harsh examples out of people and silencing people so that the masses just deal with it, or they pick a side. They decide to pick a position, and you know, who knows. And then they're gonna, I said in the other video, but basically enslave people through the mind. I think it's a chip that they would put in the mind, and it's also part of metaverse to kind of keep that familiarity with people, and also to help build and just weaken everybody, because you want people, it's like a bubble within a bubble, right? The most important is the physical world right now. It's the spiritual, because of this world, the physical world, is a bridge between the intuitive and the creative and the physical. It's a balance between everything. This is like the most balanced world. And so this is the indicator of where our spirits are. That's why I say, like, this is a simulation of what's happening in the spiritual world, because of the fact that this place dictates it brings in the spirit of the people into the physical. If you're a kind, loving, generous person, that transmutes, right, into how you act among the world, right? Your actions are backed by your intentions. Not always, right? Some people have ill intentions, but it's a manipulation. But that's overcomplicating it, because I know you get what I'm saying. But this is a barometer, or whatever you want to call it, to show people where we're at spiritually. Because if we were all elevated, these evil things that exist in the physical world cease to exist, because the demonic side ceases to exist. It's not possible. It's just not humanly possible when you exist from a place of neutrality and up. Neutrality and up, because you have no capacity to be horrific and reactive and negative and judgmental. And it's the same thing with, like, the more, I guess I'm becoming more enlightened, but it's like the more enlightened I become, the less reactionary I am. And I used to not like that, because that was my defense mechanism, is to be reactionary, to have my guard up, to be defensive towards people, right? Like I liked that part of me, because that's what I learned to protect myself and was very familiar with. And I knew that it worked. But the more that I understand people, like, and essentially, like, I guess the way that I'm becoming enlightened is because there's only so many varying experiences that we can have. Since the beginning of time, we've all experienced and are currently experiencing things that are so familiar to the other person. And to think of reincarnation too, it's like, from just on a physical world in Earth, it's so silly to even think of the way that we look at each other differently. It's like everything about it is just like so silly. I was never racist to begin with, so that's not really an issue, and I've never critiqued people off the way they look, so it's, again, that's not an issue. But it's like nothing, I don't know, it's like almost like nothing really matters except for what's good, except for what's positive in the world. And just let people act out if they want to act out. The only issue that I have is like, what's the real life way we're supposed to handle this? Like, really, like, what are we supposed to do? We can't just, like, I don't know. What happened during the Martin Luther King Jr. protests? People were killed and stomped on, right? There was no violence, though. But and I'm just saying, because the problem is, like, they have, like, massive ways to like kill people. So I don't really know what the right thing to do is. I mean, I would never choose violence, but like, how do you see? That's the thing, is I think, and not to get into the political thing again, but I do believe in certain people who were in office that were effectively demonized. I think that they had really good intentions. I genuinely do. They did so much for the economy that a lot of people that go unrecognized, but a lot of people in the military would back me up on this, and a lot of people who are independent contractors, like federally contracted people, they would agree, and just like other people, like business owners, would agree that it was very, 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 very good. And that falls in line with what I was saying here, of people get in and they have good intentions, but they try this massive campaign against them. So I think that's the best way to go about it, is to outsmart them by recognizing the good in where the good people are, where it makes sense, and actually doing some sort of like intellectual research in order to figure out like how to use their method against them, just as they did, you know, back then. And fix that. We have to fix that and hold people accountable. And not take what they're doing of like silencing people and forcing people, you know, it's like they're speaking on our behalf, but we don't agree with it. Like, we definitely don't agree with, well, I mean, if you don't agree with it. But anyway, so I have this Bible. As I told you, it's like, this has probably seen so many different things. What is it called? Like exorcisms. This thing's been put to work. But in the front, I thought this was really interesting that they put in here. I will read it to you guys. And then I'll read you this part. Because this part right here, well, I'll get to, okay. So it says, what we fear as a rock-bound frontier proves to be a harbor, in many cases to be desired and never to be refused. The tragedy that has overtaken you and others like you is unspeakably sad. Yet it is well to remember that man's greatest happiness does often emerge from his calamities. In the path of trials and tribulations, the man's perfection and hidden strength and those who suffer should reflect that now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Hopefully I read that okay. I don't know, that was probably hard to understand. I'll try and hold this here and see if it focuses, but I thought that was really interesting, especially because my last, I don't know if it was my last one or the one before that, where I had those two cards where she was standing up against, it was here, so it focuses, and then I had this one and the other one with a cacti. You have to go look at the other video, and it reminds me of those images. That's what it reminds me of. So then I was thinking, I was just flipping through, like, I don't know, just not really flipping through, but just kind of like this, and I saw Galatians. I'm like, Galatians? I ain't never heard that before. I didn't know Galatians was a book in here. And the one that caught my eye shocked me to the core, girl or boy. Okay, so it says, where is it? Okay. Alright, so it says, now the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these: adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, like idolatry, is that how you say it when you're false idols? Witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies, envying, murders, drunkenness, revelings, and such like. Sorry, I'm like struggling because there's noises outside. And I'm like thinking about a million different things. Okay, let me just tell you which one this is V5, chapter 5. I don't know what these would be called. Like numbers 19 through 24. So it's basically telling you like what's of the Lord and what isn't, right? So envy, murder, being drunk, I'm just scanning. It says, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering. Okay, long-suffering, I want to stop there because I feel like this is indication. It's like long-suffering, like you learned so much through the tragedies of the past and through pain, and there was divine intervention through the will of the people, through acting. It's like the spirit of the angelic realm, the spirit of God acting through people, and in time it worked itself out, right? Granted, what I said about our current circumstances is seemingly doom and gloom, but it's certainly a lot more progressive than it ever has been. And I think this is a really wonderful example of how it works against the enemy, essentially, because I think that any demonic entity, purebred demonic entity, is the enemy, obviously. Is it created, first of all, it created a new culture of people, right? African Americans are literally their own people. They're people of the land. Not to mention, I didn't mention Native Americans. Like, even these Quakers, they tried to make Native Americans equal people, and they refused. So they went off and, killed all these Native Americans. It's literally the people in power. That's the only people. It's not all the little guys and the little guys that were trying to have positions of power, because granted, the people who kind of made a name for themselves and made their own personal gains, like some of them good, some of them bad, but it's like offsets, right? It's not the same. It's not the same origin as them necessarily. I mean, it isn't. You get what I'm saying. They don't have that same information, and they certainly don't view them as the same. Heck no. They definitely don't. They look at them as pawns. They look at them as stupid. They look at everyone like that. Anyway, what was I saying? I forgot. Okay, so yeah, because they created a culture that has a value system of freedom for everyone, for immigrants, for slaves, for being able to chart your own territory and to become something, like the land of opportunity. Like, this is truly the land. Think about, there are a lot of rich immigrants here. Like, don't underestimate the United States as if there's no opportunity. It's I'm not gonna lie, there are difficulties for certain people and certain races and everything, but there's a lot of opportunity. You just have to find ways to use it for you, it's not become, anyway, not to get too much into it, but yeah, so it created a different culture of people, of understanding one another, that a lot of other places don't have. You think about other countries, and there are a lot of countries that are really oppressive and really racist and really just not a place that you can have the same opportunities and freedoms. That's why all of these foreigners want to come in here, right? That's one of the reasons a lot of these foreigners want to come in here. This is a very, very wonderful, beautiful place. And so, yeah, that's one way they messed up, is they ended up giving an opportunity for people to enlighten themselves and to get a taste of what it's like to have a place where harmony can exist, and in some places do exist. You can't deny that. When you look around, there are a lot of wonderful Black, white, Asian, Mexican people that get along very, very well and want the best for people and treat people as equals. You don't see that in other places, or that you can earn a living making nothing. You come here with absolutely nothing and then explode into something. So anyway, that's why I think it's so special here. It's very special beyond the physical. In a spiritual way, it's very special. And anyway, yeah, long suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Against such there is no law. So on and so forth. You can just read that for yourself. It's Galatians 5:19 through 23. And I just was so shocked by that, because I was like, oh my goodness, that's the conclusions that I came to from my visions. Thank you, God. Love that for me. So I just wanted to share that with you guys, and that's it. That's my video, and I'll see you guys later. Bye. Okay, I forgot to mention a bunch of things, but these are the two cards. I was like, well, I'll let you guys look at cards while I talk. So Archangel Ariel is coming through twofold, and these are the two cards. So if you guys want to look it up, this Archangel is important to the reading. But basically what I wanted to say is the way that they're dehumanizing and demoralizing is through these different processes, right? And depopulation. It's all through these different processes. And the reason why they see themselves as a master race, because they're demonic, is because this was originally Lucifer. But it's a miscommunication and misunderstanding, because the free will, they're trying to turn it into something evil since he was a fallen angel. When in fact, because he's a fallen angel, this was all predestined so that we could have the opportunity to experience the long suffering, to choose to go back, to no longer suffer, to do what's right. And so they're trying to preserve that. They're trying to preserve this place because they want to execute control over people, demonic control over people, and bring everyone down, bring the souls down so that they can further exist. And the lower our frequency goes, the more that they're able to exist, and the more that they're able to exist in the physical world as well. And that's why people are able to see. And if we continue to see them as, reptilians or demons or whatever you want to see them as, because that's the frequency of the world at that time, or whatever different examples that I was giving you as to why people can see that. And on top of that, if they can continue to pull down the frequency, then they can exist as like another realm of hell, essentially. But it's obviously proven, like I showed you through history and through the Bible, because it's represented in the Bible as well, that the spirit of people, which is the spirit of good, the spirit of God, always prevails and never actually lets it go that far. It's just not possible. And so I think that's a way to reinstore faith in people, that it's just never going to work. Their plan's never going to work. And if anything, it always backfires on them. And, something needs to change, because we don't have to continue to be like this anymore. So that's basically it. I know I didn't touch on the deeper things of like dehumanization and everything, but I talked about with the transhuman and the transgender, and breaking up family units and pulling religion out because they tried to manipulate it and use it against people. So now it's rejecting it completely, when that's pulling you from your soul's truth. You're pulling people away from your truth because you're denying it because of the atrocities that they used it for. Because they lied about it, right? They did half truths about it. They used it as a means of controlling people. instead of liberating people. And so you can kind of figure it out yourself, I guess, on a deeper level, but or I'm sure you already figured it out. But yeah, that's it. Bye.